What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Secret Restaurant Podcast. I will be your host for this journey. My name is Nate Hoyle. As I mentioned last time on the podcast, been moving through the Denis Johnson biography that just was released late 2025 of last year. As I mentioned, I've been enjoying it thoroughly. In fact, I've been reading it in small pieces just about every single day. I don't know if I ever said the title of it. It's called Flagrant Self-Destructive Gestures, a biography of Denis Johnson. And it's written by Ted Geltner, Geltner. And this biography writer, coincidentally, also had a claim to fame where he wrote the biography of Harry Crews, the author Harry Crews, who I've talked about on the podcast. And I'm becoming more and more of a fan of him the more I read his books. I actually did read that Harry Crews biography referenced before, and that's an exciting one to read to find out about that writer's life, which makes sense because the anecdotes and the stories in this Denis Johnson biography are really fascinating, and I pretty much have been picking it up every single day, reading a little bit of it at a time, because I feel like if I read it all at once, I won't actually enjoy it, although I probably could sit down and just burn through it. Burning through books, although not in the way commonly referenced. Burning through books in a way that turns the pages so rapidly that people turn in awe and admiration, but not turning the pages so rapidly that they create friction enough to burst into flames. Yeah, but I just read it before I go to sleep typically. And honestly, I'll read 15 pages and it doesn't even feel like I read 15 pages. I'll just be all completely focused on it. And it's one minor difference is that this is the first book I've read with my new lenses of my glasses. And so I think that does make somewhat of a difference. Although I think a lot of it also has to do with the writing and my interest in the subject matter. But it's crazy because I don't know if anyone else gets this, but sometimes if you've been on your phone for a long time, your brain is stimulated in a way, it feels a certain way, if that makes sense. And I get that feeling sometimes when I'm editing my own work or if I'm writing, but I've never really had that feeling of that much focus and fixation on an actual book until this one, I think. Because I put the book down after reading it and then I set it aside. And then a few minutes later I went back and it felt like I had been on my phone, but I actually was reading, if that makes sense. I don't know how to explain it. I guess that just proves how badly I needed glasses and how much of a struggle it was and how much I still managed to accomplish in my life and how greatly I had overcome the challenges of being borderline blind. There is another question, though, of nonfiction versus fiction and how each one engages and how each one, the reader engages in them. Because, and also, you can't deny that this biography was written in a literary way. The stories are very interesting, and it's written in a way that's accessible and readable. But also, I wonder how much of nonfiction or absorbing information in a way that's you already kind of have the general concept, and so you're kind of collecting details and info, as opposed to being taken on a narrative. Which one is easier to actually read? Because for a long time, I had always been a fiction guy. Most of my books I have are fiction. I have some autobiographies and nonfiction and whatnot. But when I thought about what books I wanted to read, what books I wanted to write, what books I spent time with, even more than poetry, it was always fiction was at the top of the peak. But now that I'm looking at this biography of a life and filling in these pieces of a person that's been so mysterious, the engagement I have with it is kind of unlike anything I've ever experienced while reading books before. I could go through some of the stories of his life. I've read up to the section that has his photographs. You know how books sometimes they have the 10 pages of glossy photographs in the middle of it. This one's got those, which is pretty cool. Pictures I've never seen before. And the cover is crazy too. It's called Flagrant and Self-Destructive Gestures, and it's literally got a picture of him on a boat, and there's a guy holding a rifle behind him, which is kind of I feel like he was so mysterious, and I say this all the time, but I did actually get to meet him when he was in his mid-60s, and it was at the end of his life, although we didn't know that he was sick or whatever. But then he seemed like such a zen, peaceful dude. So I think just that experience, meeting him and seeing him in person, kind of made it feel like all the stories that he wrote about, like, it was hard to associate that person that I met with, like, the kind of violence and chaos and addiction and madness that he was known for writing about and kind of rumored to be participating in. I'm so excited to talk about this book. I keep on running out of breath. But yeah, so just from that experience, like, I knew that his book, Jesus' Son, was semi-autobiographical, and the stories in that book, if you've read it, are very, like, they involve crime and drugs and violence and all that. And then this biography pretty much covers the reality that those stories were all true. It kind of talks about Iowa City in the 60s and 70s was a lot different place than it is now. It was sort of like a huge avenue for drug trafficking, and there was a lot more drug use and craziness. I don't want to talk about all the anecdotes and stories in here, and I think if you're going to read this autobiography, you should probably read Jesus' Son first. In fact, I'd probably read a bulk of his novels first, like I would read Angels. And did I ever finish saying how far into the book I am? I'm like 125 pages in. But so one story, because Jesus' Son, a lot of it takes place in Iowa City. And this, he even said it when I saw him read and talk. He said all the stories pretty much happened to him or someone he knew. Like, they're basically true stories, although they're put into fiction. He was really in a car accident that someone died, and he was really, like, meeting all these kind of outcast people. Also references a lot of the bars from the 70s he would go to that actually I have been to, which is cool too. Like, it describes it in a way that you can understand if you've never been to Iowa City, but it talks about the Deadwood. It talks about the mill, which was actually bulldozed like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But all those bars were ones that I went to all the time back when I was living in Iowa City and going to school there. I keep on making squeaky noises on the book cover because it's like a matte finish. So that's what that is. But yeah, when I saw him, it was in Iowa City. So I wonder what it was like going back there when you had such histories. But here's the one anecdote I'll say, because I think it's pretty cool of a story, not necessarily that it happened, but it's a cool story. So Denis Johnson basically took part in a Vietnam protest in the late 60s when he was an undergrad student there. And he got arrested. And while everyone else kind of bailed out, paid their bail, Denis Johnson actually spent like a week in prison, or in jail rather. And so that experience was actually what led him to, he met one person in jail basically that linked him to kind of outside of the school, the social outcasts who were living in Iowa City, and kind of the people who went to the bars that the graduate students and the students didn't go to. And so kind of that experience of getting arrested for a Vietnam protest and then spending a week in jail kind of set his whole life on a different path that ended up kind of sending him into chaos for the next, like, 10 years, basically. I was thinking about the whole thing I was saying about reading being like being on my phone. Reading this book, I get so absorbed in it. It's a similar feeling once I put it down as though I was on my phone, and then, like, I leave and come back and was like, what was I doing in here that made me so engaged? And you'll think at first, like, oh, was it my phone? No. Oh, no, I was reading that book. I think that the stimulation I'm referring to is regarded as addiction and withdrawal. And so let's not try and romanticize it. You got to be addicted to one thing or another, or at least I do. And so I guess that must be a new version of it. People are saying they're addicted to books, addicted to literature. I never really believed them. But, you know, here I am, standing just feet away from the book that I'm enjoying so much. And if I go in the other room, I'll bring it with me. And if it gets taken away from me, I'll start screaming. The point that I've read now in this book, though, he's still only published poetry. It's interesting to think about the environment of poetry back then, because obviously there were less people. And I think that literally 2 of the people he worked with, that he published books with, One went on to start Grey Wolf, and then I can't remember what the other one was, but it was a well-known independent publisher. And so, I mean, he was like kind of underground famous for his poetry around Iowa City and around the literary world. But it's interesting to think how that happened. His first two places he published with went on to be publishing independent publishers that are literally still around today, and it's like 60 years later, 50 years later, 60 years later. And so, I mean, is that just lucky? Did his books have a part in their success? Or was it just that back then it was easier to build a press and market it and get people to read it too? Is probably part of it. And then also the school itself, the Iowa Writers Workshop. I mean, I have friends. This is going to sound like a slight, because I have friends that literally, one of my best friends in Davenport graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop. But he even says it in the book, like back then in the 60s and 70s, it wasn't as elite as it is now. Like now, a lot of the people who get in there are from like East Coast, like Ivy League schools, and the workshop kind of focuses on prestige, whereas back then it was more like kind of misfits. One of them was like a retired basketball player who went on to write poetry. That was someone in Denis Johnson's class, I mean. Which, I mean, in reality, those kind of structures, publishing, MFAs, they kind of went that way of like prestige and Ivy League stuff and being ultra selective and I can't think of the other words. I don't want to say high class, but it kind of went that way of prestige. But really, it doesn't make a difference what they're doing over there, because there's also other people doing things over here that don't really worry about what degree you have or what school you got into or what your GPA is. They worry more about the writing and whether they relate to it and enjoy it and whatnot. And there's overlap between the two. But it is something they actually talked about in the book, like back when he got into school. Although like really famous teachers were teaching there, the students themselves weren't necessarily writing for prestige. They were definitely, some of them writing for fame, and some of them writing for money, and especially to escape poverty, which Denis Johnson was one of those people. But it wasn't necessarily something that was like an award or something that's supposed to be prestigious. I keep saying prestige over and over again because I can't think of adjectives. Perhaps one day the world will put down their phones and put on their new glasses and start reading in such a hyper-fixated way that they forget that the phone is even there. And instead of checking your phone for the time or checking your phone to look at a social media app that you don't even remember what it is that you looked at, you will have a tiny pocketbook, perhaps a mass market paperback in your front pocket, just like the olden days, just like people used to do long ago. I'll talk more about that one later. Have you guys seen Train Dreams yet? You're running out of time. The Oscars are in the middle of March. Got to go check that one out. And just sit down, get all settled in, and patiently let it flow over you like a train, and you're tied to the tracks. One cool thing about the movie, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but one of the actors actually in the film, and then also the person narrating Train Dreams, the movie, is the same person who narrates the audiobook of Train Dreams. And I'll have to, I don't know if I'll actually do this, but it would be interesting to compare the script of Train Dreams on the screen with the actual book itself, because I think a lot of the language and the sentences were borrowed from the actual book and the narration. And so I liked that decision. I've talked about the narrator too. His name's Will Patton, and he reads most of the Denis Johnson audiobooks that I'm aware of. I mean, definitely the majority, and then maybe there's one that he doesn't, Laughing Monsters, and then he doesn't read all the stories in Largesse of the Sea Maiden, which is Denis Johnson's final posthumous short story collection. There is a mysterious audiobook of Angels that I've literally only seen. They had it in this thing that was like an MP3 player, but it was only that story on it. And I swear I saw it like years ago. It was for sale, but there was only a few left, and then I literally haven't seen it anywhere since. I wonder what that recording is like, because there's not any Angels audiobooks today at least, there's not any Angels audiobooks available on like Audible or YouTube or Spotify or whatever. I'm so crazy though. I've read all the books, and then I've also listened to all. I haven't read every single one of his books, but I've read all of the ones that I've read just by reading them on the page, and then also listened to them later on audiobook. And so a lot of the stories I've consumed in two different ways, like a lot of different times. And if you're asking me, what are my top 5 Denis Johnson books of all time, it would be difficult to answer, but let me think about it right now. I would do Dreams as a honorable mention because it's a lot of people's favorite, and it probably is a good introduction to his style. But really, with the page count, it was published in a magazine first. It's like a novella, but it's really more of a short story. It's very short, even though the story itself takes place over a grand scheme of time. It's hilarious. I just was thinking this. When I first read it, I checked it out from the Iowa City Public Library, and then I wanted to keep it, or I wanted to have the story. And so for some reason, I literally scanned all the pages, and then I like printed out the pages, like one by one, scanning them. And the amount of ink that probably took was like way more expensive than just like finding the book used. I have no idea why I did that. I wonder if I still have it somewhere like in a bin, my scanned version of Train Dreams. I've bought it since though. But so honorable mentions, that one. Check out the movie. There's movies of Jesus' Son, Train Dreams, and then there's one I haven't seen for The Stars at Noon, which is a good book as well, but that movie did not do well in ratings. Number 1, you got to start with Jesus' Son. How many times I have to talk about that book? But it's the one that everyone loves. It's the best beginning of learning about his style, and it's probably his best writing. And then I'd probably go Angels, his debut novel. That one, I would say the language in it, the sentences are like a little, you can tell that he's kind of learning how to write a novel at that point, because his language, like a lot of writers, his sentences become more condensed as his career went on. Like think about Cormac McCarthy or to name other writers. Going to keep it to the point at hand. So yeah, Jesus' Son, Angels, which are coincidentally the first 2 that I read. And then I'd probably go with Resuscitation of a Hanged Man. That one is kind of my secret favorite, but the impact it has isn't really the same as the other 2 books. You won't be able to talk to as many people about that one. But stylistically and universe-wise, it's pretty similar to Angels, and the story itself is kind of out there. The guy goes through a mental health crisis, and he gets very confused as the book goes on. But it's very funny, and it's very... I think about it a lot when I'm writing characters, because it's very... Even though it's like very removed from telling the characters, it also does a good job of explaining how uncertain and how confused this main character is, in the way that everything he perceives he's like uncertain about, despite the story taking place in like a very real and important place and time and timeline. I'm going to force myself to not have to ramble after every book I name. So what would be number 4? Number 4, I'm going to have to go with his other short story collection, Largesse of the Sea Maiden. That's his posthumous collection. I would read Jesus' Son first, and then I would read Largesse of the Sea Maiden, because they're very different books, although some of the characters overlap. The reason I think they're so different is because Jesus' Son, although it's a short story collection, like it all flows as one book and one story, and it's all the same first-person narrator. All of them stylistically could be seen as like kind of the same. And then in Largesse of a Sea Maiden, it's very opposite of that, where each story kind of in its style, and everything from like the POV to the way that he's writing sentences and everything in between. That book, every single story kind of stands on its own. And so it almost feels like that last one was written more in a time where he was thinking more about publishing single stories, and each story kind of had its own its own isolated place of existence that was supposed to belong in like a magazine or belong in a publication. whereas Jesus' Son is more like a flowing piece of work. That was 4. People are going to get mad which ones I choose. You know what? Just because I'm a poet, I would throw in his collected poems. I can't remember what it's called. It's got a really long name, but you can read basically all of his poetry collections in one volume. It's got like Throne in the title. And identically to this biography, I always said when you look at if you read Jesus' Son first and then you look at the poems, you can kind of like think about where he might have been in his life when he was publishing those collections. Now with the biography, it's even more so. Like, for example, in one of the poems in that book, he talks about working at a bookstore. And after reading that, it always stood out to me because I was like, when the hell did he work in a bookstore? Like, is that something that was during Jesus' Son? Or something he just obviously didn't talk about? And now when I'm reading this autobiography, it's like talking about he did work in a bookstore very briefly. I feel like my preference is the first. Yeah, that's pretty solid. Maybe the last one might change, although I always have to stand up for the poems, and it's how he started his career. I love the poems. I've talked to other people who said that didn't really reach them in the same way as his fiction. People will always say Tree of Smoke, but it's kind of depressing. It's a Vietnam War novel, and it's pretty long. And then I also really enjoyed Stars at Noon, which could maybe find its way instead of the poetry collection. But that is it. The top 5. What did I do? Jesus' Son, Angels, Resuscitation of a Hangman, Largesse of the Sea Maiden, and then whatever the poetry collected works is, The Throne of the General of the 10 Million, blah, 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 blah. All right, let me read it, actually. The Throne of the Third Heaven of the Nations Millennium General Assembly. The Throne of the Third Heaven, The Throne of the Third Heaven of the Nations Millennium General Assembly. Poems collected anew by Denis Johnson. Most of the people I talked to who saw Train Dreams really liked it, though. Most people were very moved by it. A few people didn't like it, but yeah, it's exciting. When it first got announced it was coming out, I kind of had that on the fence feeling. You know, if people all started liking it and not reading his books, I'd be mad. But if everyone hated it, I'd be even more mad. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. All right, yeah. I keep on striving to talk about that one, but it seems to be talked aboutable in my mind at this point. Maybe next time, because I got a whole lot of pages left of The Flagrant and Self-Destructive Gestures, a biography of Denis Johnson. Definitely going to talk about it again, maybe even next week. All right, I guess I'll see you then. I guess I'll see you over there at that time when it happens. And I hope that you all have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.